Introduction, the universal anguish, and the ancient answer. Human existence, regardless of material comfort or societal standing, is frequently shadowed by a quartet of profound internal afflictions. Depression, the gnawing ache of meaninglessness, a pervasive sense of emptiness, and the existential dread of being. In the modern context, we see clinical diagnoses and quick fix solutions for these psychic wounds. Yet, over 2500 years ago, a spiritual tradition arose from the Indian subcontinent, founded by Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, that offered not just a palliative, but an outright antidote to these very maladies. Buddhism is fundamentally a psychology of suffering and a technology for its cessation. It offers a radical diagnosis of the human condition and a clear path toward a life of genuine peace, profound fulfillment, and intrinsic meaning. By internalizing and practicing its core insights, the Four Noble Truths, the doctrine of impermanence, the liberating realization of emptiness, and the cultivation of compassion, one can systematically dismantle the structures of the mind that give rise to depression and despair, and truly arrive at meaning as an experiential state rather than a discovery of external fact. This essay will delve into the essential life lessons derived from the Buddhist path, demonstrating how they serve as potent philosophical and practical weapons against the common afflictions of the soul, culminating in an exploration of how compassion, when extended both inward and outward, is the very alchemy that transforms an empty life into a beautiful one. Part I, the diagnosis of suffering, the Four Noble Truths. The first and arguably most critical contribution of the Buddha is the framework of the Four Noble Truths, dukkha, samudaya, nirodha, magga. This structure provides the necessary philosophical grounding to understand where depression, meaninglessness, and existential emptiness actually originate. 1. The noble truth of suffering, dukkha. The term dukkha is often translated simply as suffering, but its meaning is far broader, encompassing discontent, dissatisfaction, anxiety, anguish, and a fundamental sense of unsatisfactoriness. It names the inherent stress of a life lived in continuous tension with reality. Depression, anxiety, and the general feeling of what's the point are not aberrations. They are precisely the expression of dukkha in modern psychological language. The lesson for the depressed mind. The most isolating feature of deep emotional pain is the feeling of being uniquely cursed or flawed. The first noble truth immediately provides a vast, collective context. Suffering is universal. The pain is real, but the suffering is not a personal pathology. It is an inherent quality of conditioned existence. This philosophical step, from I am suffering to suffering is a condition of being, is deeply liberating. It dissolves the self-blame that anchors depression and allows one to move from self-recrimination to self-compassionate inquiry. Furthermore, dukkha is categorized into three types: the suffering of pain, literal physical and mental discomfort; illness, grief, the suffering of change; the stress arising when pleasurable experiences end; the anxiety of knowing joy is fleeting, the suffering of conditioned states; the fundamental unease of simply being a conditioned entity subject to birth, aging, and death, which fuels existential emptiness. By acknowledging the third type, Buddhism confronts the void head-on. Meaninglessness is not a lack of external goals, but the recognition that the self, upon which all external goals are projected, is fundamentally unstable. The ultimate purpose of Buddhist practice is not to avoid life's pain, but to resolve the conditioned suffering, the background hum of dissatisfaction. 2. The noble truth of the origin of suffering, samudaya. If suffering is universal, what is its root cause? The Buddha identified the source as craving, thirst, clinging, or attachment. This is not the desire for food or survival, but the compulsive, unconscious demand for things to be other than they are, the tenacious clinging to the pleasant, the desperate push away from the unpleasant, and the powerful attachment to the false notion of a permanent, separate self. The lesson for meaninglessness and emptiness. Meaninglessness arises when we mistakenly assign ultimate, inherent meaning to impermanent, external objects, wealth, status, a perfect relationship, physical beauty. We are conditioned to seek happiness by acquiring and holding onto things. When a desired object is attained, the satisfaction is fleeting, suffering of change. When a desired object is lost, the pain is intense, suffering of pain. The core of Samudya reveals that the object of desire is not the problem, the act of clinging is. The endless, restless seeking for a special something that will finally validate our existence is the engine of existential angst. By understanding that our own craving is the source of the dissatisfaction, the focus shifts from fixing the world to transforming the mind. True meaning, therefore, cannot be found outside. It must be cultivated within by extinguishing the fires of craving. Part 2. The dynamic realities of existence, impermanence and emptiness. Having diagnosed the problem and its cause, the path to liberation requires a deep philosophical understanding of reality, encapsulated by the doctrines of anicca, impermanence, and nyat, emptiness. These two concepts are profoundly therapeutic for anxiety and the sense of emptiness. 3. The liberating force of impermanence, anicca. The doctrine of anicca states that nothing is fixed. Everything that arises must pass away. All compounded phenomena, physical objects, relationships, thoughts, emotions, and even the body are in a constant state of flux. The lesson for depression and anxiety. Depression thrives on the cognitive illusion of permanence. I will always feel this way. This failure is final. This situation is unchangeable. This is the mind clinging to the unpleasant as if it were an eternal substance. Against despair, the recognition of impermanence breaks the hopelessness of depression. No matter how overwhelming the despair, the awareness that the experience itself is a temporary collection of causes and conditions gives hope for transformation. The dark cloud will move against anxiety. Anxiety is often a craving for control over a fluid, uncontrollable future. Accepting impermanence means accepting the inherent unpredictability of life. While this can feel scary, it is also highly liberating. Since control is impossible, effort is best placed not on trying to stop change, but on navigating it with wisdom and presence. Impermanence, therefore, transforms the relationship with our feelings. Instead of identifying with an emotion, I am sad, we observe it as a passing event in the field of consciousness. A feeling of sadness has arisen. This distance is the start of psychological freedom. 4. The creative potential of emptiness, nyat. The doctrine of nyat, or emptiness, is perhaps the most radical and yet most therapeutic Buddhist insight. It does not mean nothing matters, nihilism. It means that all phenomena are empty of inherent, self-existing essence. The problem of inherent existence, the painful sense of emptiness arises when we seek a fixed, permanent I or a fixed, permanent meaning in the world. We feel empty because the things we rely on, our identity, our job title, our roles, cannot withstand scrutiny. They change and disappear. The liberation of emptiness. Emptiness reveals that nothing exists independently. The self, the world, and all events are mutually dependent and relative. This interconnectedness is the source of profound opportunity. Because a feeling, an entity, or a self-concept is not fixed, it is mutable. The lesson for existential emptiness. If the world is empty of prepackaged meaning, then meaning is not to be discovered, but to be created. It is the ultimate declaration of creative agency. Since your actions are not fixed by fate, and since yourself is not fixed by an immutable core, every intention you form and every action you take is a real-time creation of value and meaning. True meaning is thus found not in the object of the search, a final answer, but in the process of intentional living and the quality of the actions taken. The meaningful life is one that deliberately attempts to benefit others, using the very emptiness of existence as the canvas for ethical creation. Part 3. The Path of Transformation, Ethics and Meditation, the Eightfold Path. The philosophical truths culminate in the Eightfold Path, Maga, the practical guide to cultivating mental states that naturally preclude depression and meaningless. This path is divided into wisdom, view, intention, ethics, speech, action, livelihood, and meditation, effort, mindfulness, concentration. 5. Wisdom and ethics, building a foundation of integrity. The ethical components of the Eightfold Path, right speech, right action, right livelihood, provide the stability necessary to prevent the emotional chaos that fuels depression. The lesson for self-respect and integrity. Depression is frequently accompanied by a crushing sense of guilt, shame, or self-loathing. Often, this internal critic is fueled by a recognized dissonance between one's values and one's actions. The commitment to ethical conduct is the most direct path to rebuilding genuine self-respect and integrity. By engaging in right livelihood, earning a living in a way that does not cause harm, one ensures that the very foundation of daily life is wholesome, eliminating a major source of subconscious conflict. By adhering to right speech, avoiding harshness, lying, or divisive talk, one creates a peaceful inner and outer environment. The life lived in alignment with high ethical principles ceases to produce the bad karma, the unwholesome psychological residues that lead to self-punishment and despair. The meaningful life is, first and foremost, the ethical life, one where internal and external actions are harmonious. 6. The practice of mindfulness and concentration. The practices of right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration are the direct cognitive tools for managing the thoughts and emotions associated with depression and anxiety. The lesson for mental clarity and presence. Depression is often characterized by rumination, the obsessive recycling of past failures or future anxieties. Mindfulness is the practice of non-judgmental awareness of the present moment. Mindfulness against rumination. By consciously placing attention on the breath or body sensations, the mind is anchored in the present. When painful thoughts arise, the mindful practitioner does not fight them or follow them. They simply observe them as thoughts, not facts, that are, by nature, impermanent. This de-identification from painful thought patterns is the core therapeutic power of meditation. Concentration against distraction. Right concentration cultivates the capacity to sustain attention, counteracting the fragmented, scattered mind that feels overwhelmed and empty. A focused mind is one that can engage deeply with life, finding joy and meaning in the simplest tasks. The ultimate aim of the path is to shift from a mind that reacts compulsively to suffering, craving aversion, to a mind that responds with wisdom and clarity. Part 4. The Crown Jewel. The transformative power of compassion. The lessons of Buddhism culminate in the cultivation of the Brahma Viharas, the four immeasurables: metta, loving kindness; karuna, compassion; mudita, sympathetic joy; and upek, equanimity. These are the final, most direct antidotes to isolation, emptiness, and depression. 7. Self-compassion, the foundation of healing. Before compassion can flow outwards, it must be directed inward. Depression and emptiness create a self-focused vortex of criticism. Buddhist practice deliberately reverses this by cultivating self-compassion, which is the recognition of one's own dukkha, suffering, and the desire to alleviate it. The necessity of loving kindness, metta, inward. The practice of metta meditation begins by directing wishes of well-being to oneself. May I be safe. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I live with ease. This practice is a radical act of self-acceptance that confronts the inner critic. If suffering is universal, then the compassionate, ethical response is to first tend to the suffering within. Internal softening is what breaks the self-isolation of depression and establishes a psychological baseline of fundamental worthiness. 8. Outward compassion, the path to a beautiful life. The most profound lesson derived from the integration of all these principles is that the only intrinsic, unshakable meaning in life is found in serving the welfare of others. The meaningful life is the Bodhisattva ideal, a life dedicated to the liberation of all beings. Compassion, Karuna, the wish for all beings to be free from suffering. Sympathetic joy, Mudita, the ability to feel genuine joy at the happiness and success of others. The alchemy of compassion. Why it makes life beautiful. It destroys the self-clinging root of suffering. Anatta, depression, and emptiness are fundamentally states of self-preoccupation. By shifting the attention, intention, and energy toward the well-being of others, the powerful attachment to the personal self, anatta, non-self, is weakened. The suffering of the individual I shrinks in significance when confronted with the vast, shared suffering of the world. This is not self-sacrifice, it is self-expansion. It is a recognition of the interconnected nature of existence revealed by emptiness, Nyat. When we help others, we are, on a fundamental level, helping ourselves. It establishes intrinsic, unshakable value. Meaninglessness arises when our value is conditional on external metrics, career success, validation. Compassion is a value that is intrinsic and always available. Every moment, whether offering a kind word, giving assistance, or simply wishing another well, is a direct act of value creation. This means that a life dedicated to compassion is never dependent on success or failure. It is meaningful simply by its continuous, wholesome intention. The beauty of such a life lies in its unwavering purpose, which transcends the vicissitudes of fortune. It generates the highest form of joy. Mudita, the spiritual payoff of compassion, is the experience of sympathetic joy, mudita. While clinging to personal pleasure is fleeting and conditional, dukkha of change, the joy derived from witnessing or contributing to the happiness of another is clean, wholesome, and mutually reinforcing. It is a joy that is inexhaustible because it is found in the infinite number of joyful moments occurring outside the personal sphere. This is the beauty of the compassionate life. It multiplies happiness rather than hoarding it. Conclusion. Arriving at meaning. Buddhism offers a comprehensive, practical, and deeply philosophical framework for addressing the psychic pain of depression, meaninglessness, and emptiness. The ultimate life lessons are not abstract philosophical points, but directives for mental transformation. Acknowledge suffering as a universal condition, removing the burden of self-blame, dukkha. Ceaseth futile effort to find fixed meaning in a changing world by understanding that craving is the real prison, samudya and anicca. Embraceth dynamic nature of reality, recognizing that the lack of fixed essence, nyat, is the ultimate freedom to create value. Practice self-respect through ethical conduct and mental stability through mindfulness, eightfold path. Transformed self-focused mind by dedicating intention to the well-being of all beings, karuna and metta. A life lived according to these principles is one where meaning is not sought as a destination, but experienced as the quality of the journey. It is a continuous, moment-to-moment process of reducing suffering for oneself and for others. This active, compassionate engagement with the world, born from the wisdom of non-clinging, is what makes life truly beautiful, purposeful, and reality reintroduces moments of intrinsic joy and wonder. Mindfulness, therefore, is the engine that drives the transformation described in the Buddhist lessons. It is not just a relaxation technique, it is a profound and active form of mental surgery that enables one to accept the reality of change, detach from compulsive craving, and build a meaningful life rooted in present, compassionate awareness.